Every month, 1 or 2 new evolutions will get added to Clash Royale, and every single time, people will cry about them being broken, complain about how the game is getting ruined day by day, and accuse Supercell of intentionally releasing broken stuff to milk the game. In some cases, like Evo Snowball, it's blatant overreaction and completely blown out of proportions. But in other cases, they are completely justified. Like, how can I blame someone complaining about this? Which got me thinking, what makes a bad evolution design? To mark something as bad design, we need to determine what do we mean by that. Personally, the way I see it is if you can't balance a card using just stats, then it's definitely a bad design. Take Mirror for example, it's always either trash and unusable when it's +1 level, or straight up double E-Giant is now meta level kind of broken when it's +2 levels. For evolutions, things are a little bit different since they keep the stats of the cards they evolve from. So a good card design can have a terribly designed evolution, and a bad card design can have a great evolution design. So I analyzed all the current evolutions and figured 5 things that determine if a design is horrible. Number 1. Forever lasting effects. Basically, this sounds weird because any evolution kind of keeps its ability all the time. It's not like Bomber will go back to non-bouncing bombs after a certain time. But the point is, with something like Evolved Mortar, the card itself is slowly dying from its lifetime, and evolved spells are just a one-time effect that does something cool and goes away. Hey, press that button again. Good spell. Heck, even regular troops don't feel forever lasting. But when it comes to Evolved P.E.K.K.A, this thing has a ton of HP, so you can't really spell it out in a reasonable manner. And then they decided to give it self-healing. Like, are we good here? Instead of being a regular evolution that does some tiny thing or bait out a spell, you get a war machine that stays alive for at least 30 seconds at worst if your opponent is competent. Another form of forever lasting effects is the poison of Evolved Dart Goblin. You can literally kill him instantly, but if he gets one single dart on your troop, it's just over for them. Not only are they dead, but they will infect all the other troops you play close to them. I get that he dies to most spells, and if the gas disappears he will just feel underwhelming compared to other evolutions. But maybe, just maybe, that means it's a terrible design and the solution shouldn't be making the gas cloud infinite, but rather think of something else. Like you could make him enter Code Abdod in the shop. And then you have evolved skeletons that would keep spawning more of themselves. You might not feel like they are problematic now because they got nerfed like what, 5 times? But in their prime, they used to dead ass 3 crown top players. It was literally the most unhealthy design out of all the 4 evolutions they released day 1. To me, I just feel evolutions like Musketeer are a great example of what to do when it comes to having limited effects. Like if I play a cannon for example and get a few bombs with it for free, it's already nice enough value without being too game breaking. Number 2. Polarizing Mechanics. For a design to be considered polarizing, it needs to be insanely menacing towards certain cards and not that impactful against others. And while Evolved Hunter is still not out as of the moment I'm typing this script, it doesn't take a genius to know it will be useless against cycle decks. And it's not just Hunter, as there are a few evolutions that straight up hard counter certain archetypes and does nothing against others. Currently, the biggest example of a polarizing evolution is Electro Dragon, because against cycle decks, it plays like a non-evolved one most of the time, which is fair because it's kinda weak to spells, so I can't expect it to be good against cycle decks, but the issue is with how it does against beatdown. You see a very big push coming your way and you're down a trillion elixir? Easy, just drop the Evo edrag. You have a push of your own, just drop the Evo edrag and it becomes practically impossible to defend. Getting beat by some stupid water Pokemon? Evo edrag, I choose you. And no, adding lightning to every single beatdown deck is not a viable solution, so we can't really just do that. Only cycle decks start building their deck by adding log because it's in every single one of them. And honestly, we have a lot of evolutions that are very polarizing to the point where they feel non-evolved in some matchups. This exact cage you saw struggling to take out Goblin Gang will literally feel like the most valuable card in a different matchup. To give credits where it's due, Evolved Ice Spirit used to be extremely polarizing before the rework because 3 freezes were insanely broken against tanks and pushes, but against cheaper decks, it struggled countering even the smallest things imaginable. Now after they made it only freeze twice, it's less broken against heavier pushes and much better at taking out smaller things like Dart Goblin, so it seems like they are balancing things over time. Number 3. Ruins the playstyle. Some of the evolutions straight up play the exact same and just have some buffs to their original role, and some like Bomber are slightly different, but they feel similar enough and still fill the same role they did before. Goblin Barrel, however, was a card designed to slowly chip down one tower and mainly used in Lockbait, which was a cycle deck. Evolved Goblin Barrel throws a barrel on the opposite tower, which if you play Lockbait normally, it wastes the evolution. This forced Lockbait to transform from a chip cycle deck into a split lane bridge spam deck that has some cycle elements in it. Goblin Drill used to be played as a tank for some small cards like Bomber, but the evolution also ruined that. Now it needs something to tank for it instead, because every time it goes underground, the tower will target the goblins, which are your main damage source. Royal Recruits are now a Lockbait card instead of a Fireball bait card, and my main beef with this change is that it made this a viable play. And this isn't exclusive to win conditions, as Evolved Snowball can no longer push cards away from your balloon, but instead it will push them into it. To me, an evolution shouldn't really change the role of the card, and a very perfect example for this is Evolved Royal Giant. His ability did change him enough to warrant people swapping Log for Rage, since the pushback will trigger more often. But overall, he still plays the same way he did before and still synergizes with the same troop that he used to work with. Evolved Mortar is also another great example, as the goblin spawned from the shells makes it a bit hard to distract, and if it locks on tower, it just adds a tiny bit of extra damage per hit. Just some minor buffs. It didn't change it drastically enough to where we see Mortar Balloon become the main Mortar deck instead of whatever cycly gameplay it usually sees. And if you want to go an extra mile, evolutions can serve as an opportunity to fix flaws in the original card, like how Wizard is now no longer a walking negative elixir trait. Number 4. Has less counters. When evolutions first released, they all had stat buffs to where stuff like Firecracker survived arrows, and honestly, no words can describe how broken they were when their main counter suddenly stopped working on them. Luckily, they were all changed and the design of the extra stats is no longer being used. Almost. I say almost because Bats and Barbarians still have extra HP that allows them to survive more things, but those aren't an issue here because they still die to their original counter, so it's fine. My problem comes down to cards that now have less counters due to their mechanic changes. Mega Knight normally is supposed to be countered by mini tanks, as he is a splash card, meaning he lacks high damage. The evolution he got literally just made it not possible to stop him like you would do for a regular Mega Knight. Evolved P.E.K.K.A. also had the same thing, as it heals for every kill, so swarms are no longer a reliable counter against her. Granted, it's now better because she was nerfed to heal based on the target's HP, but back then it was insane, and in my opinion, it's still a flawed design. One could bring the argument of air troops still countering both of them, which I agree, but I have a counter argument. Each card normally would have some regular counters and some efficient counters. Air cards on a Mega Knight are not efficient because he can still jump on the tower, and not every deck has air cards. In this example, Mini P.E.K.K.A. and other mini tanks are considered the efficient counter for Mega Knight because every deck has at least one mini tank. This logic is why I'm fine with Evolved Battle Ram killing swarm cards while running. Battle Ram, while it does get countered by troop, the most efficient way to stop it is stuns and buildings. Evolved Battle Ram still dies to those main counters, so it doesn't feel nearly as impossible to stop as Evolved Mega Knight. Same goes for Royal Giant. He mainly got stopped with buildings and heavy cards like P.E.K.K.A., so the evolved one killing swarm cards doesn't cause much issues. Number 5. Generational Bailout. I want to emphasize there's a difference between a regular bailout, like getting a rocket last second on a balloon, and a generational bailout where you can go Queen Royal Hogs on the opposite lane and defend this whole thing with just 2 elixir because of a stupid evolution. Stuff with permastun like Hunter will feel extremely unfair because as long as they have it in hand, they are unpunishable. This could technically apply to every single evolution, as archers for example would completely shred your cards in seconds. The issue in my opinion mostly lies in those cards that are tanky enough to be immune to spells, like you can't just throw arrows on a goblin cage, or cards that are too cheap to the point that where spelling them would be a stupidly smart overcommitment. And the fact that a 2 elixir fireball that spawns 2 tiny wall breakers isn't the most broken bailout we have is insane. That title goes to Prime Evo Tesla when it had a death shockwave, meaning it used to get 2 of them on the same push. It just felt like no matter how terrible your situation is, all you needed was 4 elixir and this evolution to be in your hand, and you would be fine. The kind of bailout that I feel would be fine are things like Evo Valkyrie perma-pulling giants. The reason this passes my vibe check is because she is a melee troop, so she will be close enough for you to do something about it. Or maybe even Evo Wizard Shield because it's a one-time thing and is a big investment. So to recap, a good evolution design has limited non-infinite effects, isn't very polarizing and matchup based, faithful enough to the original playstyle of the card, still gets countered by the exact same stuff, doesn't provide generational get out of jail cards. I don't have much to say here except I'm sick of waiting for Evo Mini P.E.K.K.A, so make it happen. I know some devs are watching, and also delete Evo edrag, my dudes.